Port Blair sits isolated in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, surrounded by dense jungle and the open sea. Inside a quiet family home here, a young man named Salman was resting in his room, gripped by a sudden and severe fever. His family assumed it was a standard illness, but without warning, Salman's demeanor shifted. His eyes locked in a vacant stare, and his body suddenly surged with an impossible, almost mechanical strength. Shoving away his mother and brother as if they weighed nothing, he marched into the kitchen. He began ripping steel plates and heavy bowls from the cabinets, hurling them violently across the room. In the middle of the chaos, he stopped. He wasn't looking at his terrified family. He was staring intensely at an empty corner of the room, tracking something that no one else could see. Then his head dropped to his chest. When he finally spoke, the voice that echoed through the house did not belong to him. It was guttural, heavy, and completely devoid of human emotion. Looking up from the floor, the voice delivered a precise warning. This boy is only a guest for 2 more days, and after 2 days, I am taking him with me. To understand what had taken hold of Salman's body, we have to look back. We have to rewind to a few nights earlier, to a dark, isolated stretch of road, and the single, seemingly harmless mistake he made on an isolated jungle road. It was May of 2019. The heat in the Andamans was sweltering, and the local community was observing the fasting month of Ramadan. Families spent their days in quiet prayer and their evenings breaking their fast together. Around 2 a.m., Salman and 3 friends took 2 motorcycles out for a late-night ride. They ended up roughly 40 kilometers from home in a densely forested area known as Korea Ghat. At this hour, the road was completely deserted, swallowed by the silence of the towering mangroves. Needing to relieve himself, Salman asked his friend to pull over. While the others stayed by the bikes, he stepped off the pavement, walking a few paces into the pitch-black tree line to find a spot. The humid, stagnant air of the May night suddenly broke. A sharp, freezing gust of wind struck Salman's body, chilling him to the bone. He froze in place. He realized that while the icy air was hitting his skin, the leaves on the branches right above him were entirely still. There was no actual wind blowing through the forest. Staring into the dark, he noticed a shape beneath the massive tree. It was a silhouette standing nearly 8 feet tall, and in its hand it gripped something long, sharp, and faintly glowing, like a blade. Salman shouted at his friends to start the bikes. As the driver slammed the throttle, the motorcycle swerved violently. Looking back over his shoulder, Salman saw that the towering figure was no longer under the tree. It was now standing dead center in the middle of the road, watching them flee. The motorcycles quickly put miles between the boys and Korea Ghat. But physical distance no longer mattered. Whatever was standing in the dark that night had already crossed over and attached itself to Salman spiritually. Trembling, Salman spent the entire ride reciting verses of protection under his breath until they reached the safety of a local mosque. The bright lights and the morning call to prayer offered a brief sense of security, but by the time his friends dropped him off at home, a profound lethargy had set in. His limbs felt heavy, and a sudden, paralyzing fever spiked, draining his remaining strength. Exhausted, he collapsed into bed. When he finally woke up and walked out of his room, he told his brother he had only slept for a few hours. His brother stared back, pale. In reality, Salman had been completely unresponsive for 2 solid days. His physical illness quickly gave way to sensory torment. At night, he could hear the distinct sound of bare feet pacing just outside his bedroom door. Sometimes he would bolt awake to the sensation of someone whispering directly into his ear. Soon, an intense, irrational urge began to plague his mind. Living just 15 minutes from the coast, he started feeling a magnetic pull from the ocean, a voice in his head demanding he walk straight into the deep water in the middle of the night. These escalating symptoms, the fever, the auditory hallucinations, and the periods of lost time, left Salman's mind and body in a state of extreme vulnerability. By the time he reached the night of the violent outburst, his own personality seemed to have been pushed aside entirely. After the violent outbreak in the living room, Salman's desperate family brought in a local Malvi, a spiritual scholar experienced in dealing with the unseen. For nearly 5 hours, the home became a battleground. As the Malvi read ancient, rhythmic verses, Salman thrashed violently. It took several grown men to hold him down, while the possessing force fought against the recitations. Eventually, the thrashing stopped. The deep, heavy voice returned, and the Malvi demanded to know why it was tormenting the boy. The entity gave a very clear answer. Salman had disrespected its home. This diagram shows the geography of the encounter. The entity identified itself as a jinn. In local tradition, jinns are unseen beings that often inhabit isolated areas like dense woods. When Salman relieved himself at that specific tree, he violated an unseen boundary. The jinn agreed to leave, but only if an offering was paid. 30 kilograms of goat meat and several rooster heads, left exactly where the offense occurred. Salman was too weak to go himself. Instead, his father and his friends drove back out into the pitch-black forest of Korea Ghat, locating the exact tree from that night to leave the offering in the dirt. Salman has since recovered, but he no longer treats the quiet forest corners with indifference. He now practices the habits shared by those who navigate these islands, clapping his hands 3 times or announcing his presence before entering a secluded space, ensuring any entity nearby has time to move.